G'day and welcome to the AustrAlien Podcast for our fantastic third episode. As always, I'm your host, TJ Hollis, and with me is the voice of the people, Mr. Sean Mills. How's it doing? What's the poop, fella?
How's it doing, eh? I don't know. It's, on holidays. It's good.
Fantastic. Half your luck there.
Until next week. So, it's nice.
Awesome. Well, shall we kick into it straight up?
Let's go straight into it. So much to talk about. Let's go straight to it.
Absolutely. It's been a busy 2 weeks since we last spoke.
It has. A lot of people have said stupid things that we can talk about.
People do that. And I, for one, am slightly glad they do because it gives us some great discussion points.
It does. And, we add to that with our podcast.
Absolutely. So, the first thing I wanted to discuss today is something that actually happened last night. Today is the 12th of January, and last night our esteemed colleagues over at BuzzFeed decided to publish some unvetted documents. It is a supposedly Russian dossier of unverified allegations about President-elect Trump, and where a lot of people had known about the existence of this, nobody had actually published its contents, purely because at the moment it is utterly unverifiable. And in amongst this dossier includes apparently the belief that Russia has evidence of a number of sexual misconducts by President-elect Trump. And after this, CNN reported that there was the existence of this dossier and that nothing in it had been verified. President-elect Trump, I'm going to have a little bit of trouble still even now getting my mouth around that one.
Oh, well.
So to speak.
You have 4 years to get used to it.
That I do. But President-elect Trump released a statement basically saying that this is fake news, and when asked at a press conference, and when addressed at a press conference by one of CNN's journalists, President Trump scolded him and replied with, "Your organization is terrible. Don't be rude." And this is a quote, by the way. "No, I'm not going to give you a question. You are fake news." Sean, what do you think about this?
Oh, look, there's so many different things that you can break this down into. It's not just the one issue. First issue is I think that BuzzFeed should not have published what they had because it is unsubstantiated, and that is a basic rule of journalism, that, you substantiate, you corroborate the information. This information had been shopped around to every major news organisation in the United States during the election campaign, and all of them had knocked it back, saying, it's unsubstantiated. It can't be substantiated because the Russian government came out today and said it's not true. We don't do that, and so whether they do or not, there's nobody in Russia going to admit that they do it, because that feeds into the whole line about the Russians interfering in the US elections. So they're not going to admit that.
And now, just for a brief aside, when it comes to substantiating something in journalism, now I'm not a trained journalist in any way, shape, or form, but I am led to believe that the rule is that you find two primary sources. Is this correct, Sean?
Yeah, well, for something as big as that, I think you want as many as you can possibly get. You've got to have at least two things to, two people, two groups or whatever to say that this is true. At the moment, this dossier, which they did publish complete and unedited, it's unsubstantiated because it's something that I could have typed up on the internet and handed around to BuzzFeed if I really wanted to. Or anybody can, and that's the problem with it. They don't know where it came from, and they don't know who it's come through, what channels it's come through. Even before getting to the content itself, they don't know what the content is. You look back at the great reporting, the political reporting things of the 20th century. You look at, say, Watergate or something, and the two reporters there had the evidence and had the paper trail and couldn't do anything with it until the FBI agent, Deep Throat, substantiated it. And, with it was off the record stuff, but they knew who he was and it was vetted, and I'm sure their editor must have known who it was. And that was all substantiated then. So they could actually then go ahead with, publishing the Watergate, thing.
The files.
The files, And,
yes, and I believe they had tapes.
And they had tapes and all that sort of stuff. So they had a lot of information, but it wasn't substantiated, so they couldn't do anything with it until they had the source that substantiated it. So I think that's the first problem. I think that's your first problem. It shouldn't have been done. I don't think CNN did anything wrong.
Absolutely.
Once it's in the public, once it's out there, once it's in the public domain, it's news, because it is talking about, even all CNN did, and I've seen the article that they did, and I've seen their response to it as well, is that they simply reported that unsubstantiated information had been released about the president-elect. That's the extent of CNN's reporting on it. So I don't think CNN did anything wrong. So saying that, obviously my views on what Trump said and did fall into line with that. I think he's way off base with that. He's right, it's fake news, because at the moment there's no substantiation, so the assumption is that it's crap. That's the assumption. You've always got to go into these things with, well, this is wrong until someone can prove to me that it's right. That's from a journalist point of view. Somebody would have to tell me that. Someone would have to prove it to me that that's right, because that's big news if it's true. So I think Trump was off base, but is that a surprise?
So basically, that the fake news, the BuzzFeed was the fake news, and then but CNN perhaps didn't deserve that label this time.
No, I don't think CNN deserved it. He's also seems to have singled out CNN, and I'm sure they weren't the only news organisation to report on it. So I've seen other news organisations come out and say, well, we would have done the same thing. That's how we would report on it. So
absolutely. I really appreciated that the first people to come to CNN's defence was, in fact, Fox News, and in particular their anchor Shepard Smith.
Yeah.
And this is actually quite a big thing, because CNN is known as having more of a Democrat friendly slant, sure. And Fox News is known as having more of a Republican friendly slant on issues.
Oh, that's very PC the way you just worded that, but yes.
I'm trying to be polite about it, because I do understand there are people on both sides of this who will not agree with that. There are a lot of people who look at Fox News and feel that Fox News are completely unbiased and that CNN are very, very biased. And then there are other people who are the other way around as well, who look at CNN as being completely unbiased and Fox News as being a product of the Republican Party.
Well, when you go into watching something with a bias of your own, you're going to see the bias.
And that is very true. But just to quickly read what Fox News anchor Shepard Smith said in his defense of CNN, and I quote, "President-elect Trump today told CNN's Jim Acosta that his organization amounts to fake news. CNN's exclusive reporting on the Russian matter was separate and distinctly different from the document dump executed by an online news property. Though we at Fox News cannot confirm CNN's report, it is our observation that its correspondents followed journalistic standards. Neither they nor any other journalists should be subjected to belittling and delegitimizing by the President-elect of the United States." And personally, I applaud him.
Yep,
for saying
spot
that.
on. Absolutely spot on. Good on him.
That is very well spoken. And in the end, there are a lot of people in the USA in particular right now who are feeling a bit of fear that President-elect Trump is going to be clamping down on the freedom of the press. And whether that's a legitimate fear or not, that's not up to me to decide. But the truth is, there are a lot of people who feel this fear in the industry of journalism. So it's very good to see that people can come across company lines and across political lines to support each other in that industry. And I, for one, applaud that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very good. I like that the journalists will stick together, and there is a journalistic code, and it might get crapped on at times by particular organisations or journalists, but at the end of the day, I think most people go into journalism with the idea that they're going to they want to find the truth and report the truth. So to be belittled for that, that's it's a bit sad.
I do agree. But as I feel the need to point out sometimes, the title of the podcast is the AustrAlien Podcast. So we should probably move on to something a little bit closer to home.
Yeah, why not?
Because as much as I love the foreign politics and the social and current events from across the world, I do believe it's very important that we discuss what's happening close to home as well.
Oh, absolutely. It's such a small world now that this stuff actually matters to us, isn't it? It's a strange world we live in. So,
absolutely. And with the rise of social media in particular, we now have more contact, a greater amount of contact, and a greater intimacy of contact with strangers across the world than we have ever had in the history of humanity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not only that, this is something I realized the other day when I was driving home from work.
Mm-hmm.
Right now is the smartest humanity has ever been in history, because for the first time we not only have the communication, but we have, on average, a higher level of education for a greater number of people than we have ever had in human history before. And that has only really come about in the last 150 years. And maybe it's just me, but I think that in itself is something to be applauded and something to be very proud of.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But now we must ask ourselves, what are we going to do with this gift? With this fantastic situation that we have somehow found ourselves in?
Isn't that an interesting idea, though? I mean, you're absolutely right. That's a really interesting idea. We're at the smartest point that humanity has been as a, overarching. The most educated that everyone's been. And Yeah, we still seem... I feel in the last 10 or 15 years, we've started to make dumber and dumber and dumber decisions as people, as a nation, as countries or whatever.
Absolutely. I mean, you can see a great visual representation of this is the doomsday clock.
Yeah.
Which, for people who are unfamiliar with it, the doomsday clock is a symbolic clock that is run by a group of scientists in Europe. I couldn't tell you their organization's particular name off the top of my head, but what they do is they respond to world events, and not just natural disasters and issues in climate and issues in geology, but also how close nations are to war, to the threat of atomic bombs being used again. And basically they have this little clock that when they get worried about things, they move it closer to midnight. And this is, if you're an Iron Maiden fan, this is actually what their song 2 Minutes to Midnight is about. Let's be honest, that's an absolutely fantastic track in itself.
Iron Maiden, wow. There's a flashback.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a song from 30 years ago for you.
Yeah, that's all right. Just showing your age there, buddy.
I actually turned 34 in 2 months.
Well, there you go.
Absolutely.
Well, mate, I'm 40 this year, so, you know.
I didn't realise you were actually
that
close to 40.
Big 40 in September.
Well, congratulations.
Well, don't congratulate me yet. I've still got 9 months to live. Let's talk about Australia.
Let's get back to this. In the last few weeks, we have seen a number of ministerial expense controversies pop their heads up again. We have seen Susan Ley, who she is in the middle of an investigation into her travel claims, following revelations that she billed taxpayers on a trip where she went and bought an $800,000 apartment. There has recently been Julie Bishop, who is being investigated for charging $2,700 in order to attend a polo event. And recently there have been other issues where, going back a few more months, where a Liberal senator and Malcolm Turnbull as well are alleged to have spent taxpayer funds in order to go to the AFL Grand Final.
Mm-hmm.
And now, of course, this is all alleged, and I have to absolutely specify this. This is all allegedly. We have no 100% proof of guilt at the moment. All we have is what is being reported.
Well, let's just draw a line here for a second.
Okay.
It's actually not allegedly, because they have made these travel claims, because that's the information has come off the public record, which gets released every few months by the Department of Finance. So they have made these claims. The part that the part of this that's up in the air that the media is all up in arms about is that they're saying it's excessive, whereas people like Susan Ley, for example, came out and said, but it's within the guidelines. So it's a matter of whether it is within the guidelines or not, and that's what the investigation into Susan Ley, for example, is. I'll also point out that the opposition leader, Bill Shorten, spent $45,000 on family travel during the last election campaign, compared to $12,000 for Malcolm Turnbull. just to give someone from the Labor side the same treatment.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. That is absolutely fair enough.
I think the whole thing is crap. I think it's absolute crap from top to bottom, inside and out. I think it's absolute rubbish.
And well, what makes you, what gives you that particular mindset on the situation?
First of all, I'm bored about it. It's like there's nothing happening in politics, so the media is going to dig something up on travel expenses or parliamentary allowances or something like that. Putting that aside, these politicians are on call basically all the time for their entire term. So I don't see why it's an issue for someone like Susan Ley, who is on the Gold Coast. And again, I'll put a disclaimer on this that it is under investigation. But if I'm just taking her at her word, she's on the Gold Coast for public business or government business or ministerial business, as the health minister. Why she can't use some of that time to do something like that? She didn't bill the taxpayer for the unit that she bought.
Well, to be fair, in this situation, from what I have read, she was actually in Brisbane on ministerial business.
Okay, so
but
up
then
the road.
But then billed the taxpayers for a limousine and a chauffeur to the Gold Coast for no other reason than to settle on this apartment.
Well, if that's the case, I don't. That's a bit dodgy. That's taking advantage. But
absolutely, and that's the bit that, from what I'm led to believe, that is the piece that is under investigation. That she took a limousine with a chauffeur.
She was going to. Didn't she say she was going to pay it back?
I'm not 100% sure about that.
She said she was going to pay it back and not. Anyway, sorry, go on.
But, well, to be honest, even if she said she was going to pay it back, it comes down to perhaps, if this is the way that the chips fell, perhaps she should have realised previously, before it happened, and then paid for that out of her own pocket then and there. If you couldn't pay for that particular limousine and chauffeur that you were using for everyone for all that other time you were in Brisbane and in that area, you can still go yourself to a separate company or to the same company and say, hi, this is a different bill. This is a personal thing that I'm doing.
Yep.
So I'm going to pay for this out of my own pocket. Please do not put it on the other bill that is going to the government, because this is not a government thing. Now, in saying that, I do slightly agree with you here. I personally have no problem at all if a politician is in an area to do work and it is and the primary focus of their time in that area is a work function or to do work. I have no problem with them in their own time, during their lunch break, after work hours or whatever. I have no problem if they want to do their own business, if they have personal business to attend to in these areas.
That's the murky line, though. That's the murky line with a politician. When is their own time and when is it not? Now, I've worked for politicians, so I've seen it from that side as well, and that's, I guess, the reason why I don't like a lot of this. Not to say that I support rorting the system, but you get our local federal member would be invited to things like racing carnivals, opening, Caulfield Cup races, or doing official functions at the Rocky Show, doing official functions out at the Barcaldine Show or the Longreach Show or something like that, or on a Saturday or a Sunday, or open a shop at 9 o'clock in the morning here and do something else there. There's no, we only work 9 till 5 in that job. They're on call for when they are required. So if they're doing something like opening an official thing, or take the show for example, that would be open on the official openings on like a Friday night or something. Not many people work on a Friday night. So I think, if a politician would then have to travel to do that, they should be able to claim that.
Absolutely. I'm not arguing with you on that. And I think when it comes down to it, perhaps one potential solution to this is before you go, just before you leave, you submit a copy of what your itinerary and schedule is, as up to date as you possibly can. And if you've got to leave that town or go to an event such as the AFL Grand Final that is not a political thing, then those are the things.
Malcolm Turnbull stands on stage and presents the trophy. Is that not, as the Prime Minister of Australia, is that not a political function of his office?
That's a very good question.
So I fall on the side of that is part of his job. You expect the Prime Minister to be at the NRL, the AFL Grand Finals, the A-League, the big codes, sporting codes, not just football, but the big sporting codes. I think he would be expected to be there.
You see, I find that a very interesting thought, because most countries in the world, the leader of that country would not be expected to be there.
Yeah, we're a sporting nation, though.
Like, there are certainly a lot of countries where they would be expected to, it would be kind of a surprise if they didn't show up to watch the match, but to actually play a part in the ceremony is certainly a very unique thing.
I think the problem is it's such a grey area. I genuinely don't think a lot of these politicians, I don't think the vast majority of them go out of their way and go, I could probably write this off against the government. I think it's more that it's such a grey area. Their whole role is such a grey area, especially in those higher positions. Like the Julie Bishop one is that she went to a polo match. She was invited to the polo match through her office as the Minister for Foreign Affairs. So, as a senior minister, deputy leader of the Liberal Party. So, is it appropriate? I mean, their job is to represent their people and represent the people. Is that part of representing the people?
Just attending a sporting event? No, I do not believe that is. I will concede. Okay, Malcolm Turnbull being involved in the ceremony, in the championship ceremony, as a part of his office.
Yep.
Okay, I will concede that to you. I will say I can understand. I might not agree with it, but I can definitely understand where you could point to and say that's part of his job. However, to just attend an event such as this, such as a sporting event or a soiree or a party or something like that, no, I do not believe that should be something that you can claim. If you are not there to be a keynote speaker as part of your ministry, or if you are not there to be a part of the ceremony in some way, shape or form as a representative of your electorate, then no, that is not appropriate. I believe in Miss Bishop's case, $2,716 to attend a polo event, not only to just attend, but as the guest of the beer maker Peroni and the car company Jeep, there is no reason why, as the taxpayer, we should be funding that.
Would she have been invited to that event by those people if she was not in the position that she's in?
Quite possibly.
No, I completely disagree. I don't think she would have. Unless she's got a personal relationship with them, I don't think she's going to get invited to something like that.
Well, do you know who else was there?
It's part of her role.
Do you know who else was there?
No.
Frances Abbott.
Oh, yeah?
And for anyone who is unfamiliar with her, she is the daughter of former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, the same
and future Prime
young
Minister.
lady, the same young lady who was in the midst of the tuition scandal a number of years ago while Tony Abbott was in power.
Scandal. Anyway.
I figured you might not agree with that description.
I'm not a big fan of Tony Abbott, but that was a witch hunt on his family, and that was absolute bullshit. Anyway.
Is that a dollar in the swear jar there?
Probably is. Oh, well, 3 episodes. There you go.
I think maybe we're going to have to get a little bell or something that every time one of us swears, that's $1.
Well, we'll see if it gets through the censorship on the podcast.
See if it gets through the editing. Now, one thing that this has led to that I found a little bit interesting was that Bronwyn Bishop had decided to make a statement about Miss Susan Ley.
Yep.
And just as a bit of backstory, Bronwyn Bishop was basically forced to retire after an investigation of her travel routes, where she took a helicopter to go to a party.
Again, though, not a rort. What she did was within the parliamentary guidelines. It was within the rules. And that's the issue that I have with the whole thing. It's within the rules.
How is...
Whether it's right or wrong, from our point of view, is actually immaterial. Yes, the rules need to be changed. Yes, I will agree.
I will cede the point that it was within the letter of the law.
Correct.
But it was...
No, that's all right.
Absolutely 100%.
Just be happy that you conceded the point and move on.
It is 100% against the spirit of the law.
Look, it doesn't hold up to public scrutiny. I'll give it that. And I'm not saying she did the right thing. I'm saying that it was within the letter of the guidelines, which is, what do we expect of people? There's guidelines there. They meet the guidelines, and they're still persecuted.
But the question there becomes is, what is more important, the letter of the law or the spirit of the law?
Well, the spirit of the law is this touchy-feely little idea.
But it is absolutely taking a helicopter for, I believe it was $50,000 when you could have taken a car.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if you decided, as a lot of politicians do, I'll take a limousine, I'll have a chauffeur.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to cost what?
I've got a point about the
limos.
I've got a point about the limos and the chauffeurs as well, but keep going.
But it is so obviously flouting the spirit of the law. It is 2 middle fingers up to the thought of what can be considered acceptable, even though technically it might be allowable. But allowable and acceptable are always 2 different things.
But you can't prosecute somebody in a courtroom. You cannot prosecute someone for, if somebody has done something that was within the law, you can't then prosecute them and say, yeah, it's within the law, but, we didn't really like it. And that's really what this comes down to. Now, I would just clarify again, because I'm in no way of support of what Bronwyn Bishop did then, because I actually completely agree with you in principle. Because it's ridiculous that she would have got a helicopter for that particular situation. But the law needs to change. The guidelines need to change. I don't think we can say these are the standards. People meet those standards and then we persecute them, which is what is happening at the moment. Not with Susan Ley so much, but with all the other ones that they're starting to come out with now. Because the Susan Ley one, that came out and that was great, and so it becomes a media feeding frenzy. Who else can we get? Ooh, let's look at everybody's and see what else we can pull up, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent.
But on the other hand, should that not be something... Is that not partially the role of the media, though, to be a check and balance?
Who gave them that role?
The public.
And who...
Actually, who gave them that role? The Constitution of Australia gave them that.
No, it did not. No, absolutely not. The Constitution of Australia has nothing about the media.
Does not have
the
freedom of
Constitution
press?
Doesn't have freedom of anything in it. It doesn't have freedom of speech, freedom of press, anything like that. The Constitution of Australia tells us how to run the government. That's about it. Have a read of it. It's an interesting document. It doesn't take you long because there's not much in it.
I will. I obviously need to have another look at it then.
It's that is a common thing that's out there. It's that.
Now I'm absolutely with you. I completely understand that we do not have protected freedom of speech in Australia.
Yeah, that might lead us into our third topic in a sec. But I
yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
I find the hypocrisy of this bad. That's the part I don't like. I don't like people rorting the system, but I think people are getting caught up in... I think there's politicians trying to do the right thing and meeting the rules and then getting called out for doing so and treated like criminals. And I think if people have done the wrong thing, that's one... that's one thing. And, throw the book at them, because I will not have, politicians ripping off the public purse, because that's our money. And they need to be held accountable and they need to be held to account. But I don't think that... I just can't think of I can't think of a better way to say it. I just think we're persecuting people for following the rules. The rules are wrong. The rules need to change. They need to be tightened. They actually don't need to be tightened so much. They need to be clarified.
I believe clarification is absolutely...
They need to be black and white.
Necessary.
Yes, you can do this. No, you cannot do this. Or if something is in doubt, there needs to be a phone number that politicians can ring and go, what do you reckon?
An advisory board, perhaps.
And, a couple of, non-partisan public servants that sit there and go, well, that's not going to meet the acceptable standards.
Absolutely, fair enough.
You got one of my favourite topics in the world there, TJ. One that I have many, many, many views on. I wanted to get back to my little pinpoint. The media always goes on about chauffeur-driven limousines. These are cars which are run by the government. So this is the Commonwealth car fleet. And again, that is actually what is used. That is the preference, to use the Commonwealth car fleet, if they can, over a taxi or, private helicopter, from Bendigo to whatever. So it's actually the common car fleet, and that is actually that is written in the rules, that is the preference, to use that if it's available, because that is what it's for.
Absolutely.
So, yes, it's chauffeur driven, and yes, they are technically limousines, because that's the fleet that the government bought, because they're a better car, they last longer, and they don't have to replace them as often. So it's less money on the public. But I hate when it's reported, and she took a chauffeur-driven limousine from Brisbane to the Gold Coast. Yeah, okay, she should have probably hopped the flipping train because that's $10. But, that's
Now,
besides...
I
That's
have
a
no
different issue.
problem in saying that. I get what you're saying. You
Mhm.
believe that you don't like the undercurrent that this is something bad because it is, well, let's face it, there's a little bit of a class warfare undercurrent to it.
Yeah, that's true.
When you say chauffeur, she took a chauffeur-driven limousine,
Mm-hmm.
there's almost a kind of derision
Mm-hmm.
to it, because who the hell takes a chauffeur-driven limousine? Not one of us.
No, but that's true. I hadn't thought of that. That's
But
true.
in saying that, I have no problem. I have no problem with it, because while a politician isn't driving themselves, they can get work done. I'm enough of a realist to understand, like you said,
Yep.
these people are on call 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the same reason why I have absolutely no problem with how much our politicians are paid.
I don't think they're paid enough.
Exactly. Because these people, like you said, 24/7 on call for 3, 4, 6 years.
Yep.
Longer if they keep getting re-elected.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And these people are actually sacrificing a lot for our country, whether we agree with them or not. Well, no matter what we think of these politicians, we have to absolutely acknowledge the fact that these people are giving up a huge personal sacrifice.
Yeah.
They could be making a lot more money in the private sector
I think the prime example of that's
for
Malcolm Turnbull.
a lot less time on their behalf.
Well,
Anyway, this is a digression.
This
is a digression. But in saying that, the fact that these people are in chauffeur-driven limousines, so to speak, or as you would say, Commonwealth fleet cars, if that's what you prefer,
Yep.
with someone else driving them, that's good. They can get more work done.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely kidding yourself if you don't think that that's what they're doing in the back.
No, that's right.
When you say chauffeur-driven limousines, they're not in the back with 3 glasses of champagne, sticking their top half out of the sunroof going, woohoo, look at me, I'm in Vegas.
That's funny.
They're not
you say
doing that.
That's exactly the image I had in my head just then, was, drunken bachelorette party going down the strip in Vegas.
Exactly.
That's exactly the image that I had. So, yeah.
And that is the unbidden mental image that a lot of people do have when they hear the phrase chauffeur-driven limousine.
Exactly.
But the thing is, these people aren't doing that.
No.
Politicians aren't doing that. What they're doing is they're sitting in the back with their laptop.
Yep.
And they're working, they're reading. Because for a lot of these politicians, this is the only time that they have to really read a lot of the memos that are coming across their desk, a lot of the reports that are being given to them as part of their ministries or from their particular representative areas. They're replying to emails. They're replying to phone calls. They're on conference calls.
Yep.
They're actually working really, really hard at this point in time.
Yep.
And so we can't blame them for using these Commonwealth fleets or these chauffeur-driven limousines.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, we need to move on to the third topic. I think we've discussed that quite enough for now, and I'm sure that in future episodes we're going to discuss more so-called political expense scandals, alleged ones, as they pop up. But another news point that interested me over the last few days is Senator Leyholm came out on the TV show The Project and described childcare workers as people who are wiping noses and stopping the kids from killing each other. And basically, obviously, as we can all imagine, there are now a lot of childcare workers up in arms about such a dismissive, derisive comment. and quite a lot of parents who were up in arms about that as well, and a number of parents who actually agree with some of the later points that he put on in this. But what I'd like to do very quickly is read a few snippets from an article on MSN.com, who I believe they actually got this article originally from Mamma Mia.
Okay.
So, and I quote, "The project viewers were left stunned when Senator David Leonhelm described childcare workers' roles as wiping noses and stopping the kids from killing each other in an interview on Tuesday night. The Liberal Democrat senator made several comments that outraged and defended childcare workers in an interview on the Channel 10 show about the federal government's new $3 billion childcare reform package." Later on in the article, he then suggested a way to reduce the cost of childcare would be to cut back the required credentials of workers, adding that women didn't need training to take care of children. And a quote from Senator Leonhelm, "Apart from the fact you want to make sure there aren't any pedophiles involved, you have to have credentials these days to be a childcare worker. A lot of women, mostly women, used to look after kids in childcare centres, and then they brought in this national quality framework and they had to go and get a Certificate 3 in childcare in order to continue the job they were doing. You know, wiping noses and stopping the kids from killing each other." End quote.
I don't even know where to start.
Now, just for the time being, I'd like to put aside, just for a few minutes, I'd like to put aside the obviously cantankerous comments. Is cantankerous the right word to use there?
Sure. Sounds good.
These are obviously comments that are getting a lot of people up in arms, as you can read on Facebook and in online forums and in Twitter. In fact, just on the internet in general, you can see that this is getting a lot of people very angry. And if you are involved in that industry, you'd think rightly so. Then we've got to put aside the well beyond borderline misogynistic comments that were involved there as well. The core issue of what he was trying to say is, and what this $3 billion childcare reform package is about, is removing the need for credentials in childcare, and basically taking it back to a position that it was in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, where it was more babysitting than early childhood learning. So, what thoughts do you have on that side of things, Sean?
Ooh. Where to start? Okay, so look, I think the issue is they need to decide whether they want to be, what they want the industry to be. Is it glorified babysitting as it was in the 80s and 90s or early 90s, or is it early childhood education? Now, the industry is obvious, and the government, and it's been decided a while ago that it is education, that it is the first level of education. Most children nowadays go to childcare, which is a completely different situation than the 1970s that he was talking about, where not many did at all. So, if it's under, you've got the early learning framework, which is what they all childcare centres have to adhere by. So if you...
Which includes such ideas as guided play.
It's guided play, things like that. Basically, no, it's not guided play. It's actually child-initiated play. So if child-initiated learning, if a child comes to the teacher and goes, "Hey, look, I found this stick insect." They try to expand on that, and then in maybe future sessions, like that afternoon or the following day or something, they might get out some stuff and try to make some stick insects out of pipe cleaners, or start to look at a bit more about stick insects and learn more about them and that sort of thing. So it's I think the term is child-directed learning. It's sorry, I may be married to a childcare worker, so
And have 3 gorgeous children of your own.
Yeah, at times. I have them all the time, but yeah, no. For me, my kids aren't in childcare. That's a decision that we made. So basically, I think he's not living in reality. That's basically what I think. I could try to put that in a nice way, but I just don't think he's living in the reality of what the world is. And this is what childcare is now. Childcare is not just babysitting, wiping noses and stopping kids killing each other. I think any reasonable person in the country knows that. Not even reasonable people. I think the vast overwhelming majority of people realise that. If it is more than that, if it is teaching, if there is a framework that the educators must adhere to, then yes, they need to be trained in how to adhere to that framework. So that is why they require a certificate in childcare or early learning or whatever they call it. So, that's why they need their Cert 3 or Cert 4 if they're actually a group leader. So, yeah, I think he's way off the ball. But that's not surprising. Most of his comments usually are. So,
absolutely, this is the same gentleman who thought a great look for Australia was allowing vans to be driven around with slogans such as, "What's the best thing about getting a blowjob from your girlfriend? The 5 minutes of silence." Which, if you like that style of humour, which, no judgment, but if you are the sort of person who likes that style of humour, even you understand that there is a time and a place for that.
Yeah.
And perhaps going down the main street of Sydney in front of all of the tourists and in front of people who this is what they're going to see of the Australian people. Perhaps that's not the time and place for that. That's not a great first impression.
Look,
but anyway, that's a digression. That really is a digression.
Yeah.
And I know you've got a lot to say about that, and we will touch on that later. I promise.
Yeah, we can touch on the Lib Dems at some point because I find them a very interesting little party. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But getting back to the point at hand here, this really reeks to me of something that I personally abhor. And that is when I hear somebody say, "It was good enough for me, it's good enough for my child." And personally, now, in saying that, I am a single 33-year-old man with no children that I know of.
I'm glad you threw that in because I was going to if you didn't.
But I do believe that I am intelligent enough to put myself in the shoes of somebody else and take into account all of the things that I know of that are happening in their lives. And one thing that I personally, like I said, I absolutely abhor is this theory of if it's good enough for me, it's going to be good enough for my kids. Because I believe that one of the biggest signs of love for your children is that you want them to do better than you. Because I remember when I was a child, and we were not a well-to-do family. For a long time there, we were not even, well, let's put it this way, even with my father having a full-time job, we were not above the poverty line. And I remember times when I was a child that my mother would sacrifice having a sausage with dinner so my brother or myself could have 2 sausages with our mashed potatoes and peas.
Yeah.
I remember a lot of times where we knew exactly how far $2 worth of petrol at the station would get you.
Yeah.
And that's coming from that, and that's not the life that we led my entire childhood, obviously.
Yeah, yeah.
But coming from that and seeing the sacrifices that my mother made at home, seeing the sacrifices my father made at that time, my father was a charter boat skipper. He worked for someone else's boat. He was at home. He left at 6 p.m. on a Saturday night, and he didn't get back to port until 10 a.m. the following Saturday. Then they cleaned the boat, they refueled the boat, and he might have gotten to go home for 4 hours of sleep. And that time between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m., that 8 hours, for a lot of years, that was the only time he would get to see his family. Mm-hmm. So that is sacrifice. That is a sacrifice that my father made, and that is a sacrifice that my mother made, so that my younger brother Ben and I could have a better life.
Yep. And
every time I hear someone who's not even in that dire or desperate a situation say, if it was good enough for me, it's good enough for my children, I blanch inside.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, I might not be a parent, but to me, the one thing that embodies what good parenting is about is doing everything in your power to make sure your children get a better life than you. Make sure that your children at least get the opportunities that you did not. And then if that means when they go to childcare, if you choose to send them to childcare, if you don't, that's your choice, and that's fine. Because there are plenty of different paths to a better future. There are a lot of different paths. They're not all the same. But if you choose to send your child to childcare, you should be able to do that in the knowledge that they're getting a better experience out of that than the childcare that you got 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And when I see someone like Senator Leahelm trying to disparage and discredit this and take this away from people, it appalls me. And I know I made a promise to you and a promise to myself that one thing I was going to try and do was keep bipartisan and keep my emotions out of this show, because I want this show to be more of education than anything else. But this hurts me. This makes me sad. This really, really makes me sad. On the other hand, now, I understand some of the things that he's saying. Yep. I understand that he's saying that this is that this is making childcare more expensive than it would be without this.
Yeah, it is.
Without, and look, I cannot imagine having to pay for childcare.
Mm.
I can, even in a 2-income household.
Oh, it's not cheap.
No, it's not cheap. But there have to be better ways.
Mm.
There have to be better ways that don't sacrifice the quality of childcare.
The cost of childcare is not in the qualifications anyway. The cost of childcare is in the fact that there is the ratios of how many children you can have per teacher. So that's where the money is. You've got to employ one teacher for every, I'm not quite sure, I think it's either 4 or 6 babies in a baby's room. So, if you have a baby's room with 20 kids in it, you need 5 teachers. That's where the money is.
Well, even then, even bigger than that, a lot of the money is also in the insurance.
Oh, and then the insurances and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, it's crazy. There's the thing that would be the least effect on the cost of childcare is what this guy has hit it for. But he is so categorically wrong, and just so completely out of touch with reality on this one that I just don't even know where to start. I really don't.
Well, perhaps that, to tie this into our previous discussion, perhaps situations such as this and such as Bronwyn Bishop's $50,000 helicopter flight and other things like this, I'm not intentionally targeting one side of politics here. I'm not intentionally doing that. Don't get me wrong. I believe that there's probably plenty of examples from every side of politics and every single party.
Yep.
But perhaps this is a sign that we're seeing a lot of politicians who are not in touch with everyday Australia.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. I think, unfortunately, the longer you're in politics and the higher up you get, you start to get a portfolio. You get a portfolio, you get a junior ministry, then you get a senior ministry, and you're in cabinet, or you get all the way up to things like Prime Minister and all that sort of thing. You spend so much time working with the details that you don't see the forest for the trees. I think, you've got a lot of... I think in politics there's a lot of... I think there's a lot of backbenchers that have a real good grasp on the electorate. And what people think. And, reality. Because, your backbencher's only on, 120,000 a year, something like that. So... that's not an awful lot of money for a position like that, I don't think. Oh, no, people will criticise me for saying that, but, they're wrong, so...
Well, as we said before, keeping in mind that these are people who are literally on call 24/7, 365 days a year.
When 5 years ago you could get $120,000 for pushing a broom at a mine site, basically... I don't think that same sort of money to be the representative of 90,000 people in the National Parliament is a big thing. A local member's got to be across the board on everything as well. They might have one person come in the morning and asking about a Medicare problem, or more likely at the moment a Centrelink problem, and in the afternoon you might have someone whose house is getting repossessed by the Department of Defence. They're completely polar opposite things. Or a third person doesn't, the sewerage is backed up, So I think we don't pay them enough, but we went there. Anyway.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I
believe
I had a quote that, if I could finish something off about David Laneholm and the senator's comments and stuff, would be to quote Kate Ellis, who's the Labor Shadow Minister for Early Childhood Education, which I just love this. Quote, "These are the ranting comments of a dinosaur who is stuck in the past and is choosing to ignore all the evidence. Early childhood educators are hard-working professionals. We need to value them more and not talk down their incredibly important work on national television." End quote.
Wow.
And just for you, I quoted a Labor politician, so I like Kate Ellis. I think I think she's a
I
queen.
don't know if end quote was exactly how you should have finished that. Perhaps drop mic would have worked.
Yeah, almost. Yeah.
Wow, that's
Parents
not
trust.
pulling any
No,
punches in the
she's
slightest.
she's awesome. She's awesome. You know, she actually also goes on and says, "Parents trust educators with an incredible responsibility every day. Of course, we need to make sure they're skilled and qualified." Drop mic.
I mean,
Walk off stage. You know, there's not much else.
to me that is it goes without saying.
Anyway.
It goes without saying. But one thing that this entire quote from our esteemed senator, one thing that it put me in mind of when I read this is I thought, is this a quote from a politician? We could almost play a game here. Is this a quote from a politician or a quote from the character Mallory Archer on the TV show Archer? And if for anybody who hasn't seen Archer, it's a spy comedy which involves which has the character of Mallory Archer, who her entire character premise is that she is rich and out of touch. And when I first read this quote, the first thing that came to my mind is seeing Mallory Archer sitting in the back of a chauffeured limousine, turning to her chauffeur and saying, "Chop chop. If I wanted to sit around here going nowhere, I would become a school teacher." And that is exactly what came to mind when I read this quote from Senator Leonhelm. And to go back to what we were saying about being out of touch, if you were reminding people of a character whose entire purpose is to sit there and say nasty things about regular people,
Yep.
you might need to seriously reevaluate your thoughts, what you're saying, and what you think about the average Australian who you are representing.
Yep.
Now, when I brought up the concept of some of these politicians being completely out of touch with the common Australian, and again, I'm not talking about all politicians. I believe that's a very silly thought to say that all politicians are out of touch. That's doing a great number of people who were sacrificing a lot for our country a big disservice.
I think it's just lazy use of language as well.
Absolutely.
It's lazy thinking just to class a whole category of people as something or other.
Very much so. Very well said, Sean. But
I try once in a while.
We are currently in the biggest upswing of populism in politics that we have seen in half a century.
Yeah.
At this point in time, instances like this should be completely career suicide. You know, like, we have just seen the two most popular politicians in America's political climate were the populist candidates. Now President-elect Donald Trump, I actually got it this time, and Mr. Bernie Sanders, Senator for Vermont.
Yeah.
Who is generally believed by most people, including Trump supporters in America, that had he run against Trump, he would have won.
Oh, I think he would have.
And both of these people, now not only them, people such as Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, people such as Pauline Hanson in Australia, and, you know, even to even to an extent, people such as Glenn Lazarus and Bob Catter and Darren Hinch are all gaining popularity purely from populist opinion, from populism in their policy. From just being on, running the gamut from just being on specific issues in such as Glenn Lazarus and Darren Hinch's state to what some people might say and define as pure lowest common denominator in Pauline Hanson and One Nation's case. Is now the political climate really the time that people like Senator Leonhelm should be trashing the common Australian worker?
Well, he got re-elected.
He got re-elected before these comments.
Yeah, but he's said a lot of stuff like this before. He's made a lot of these sorts of comments.
In saying that,
I think
Senator Leonhelm and the Liberal Democrats ran themselves on a populist policy, and a populist slogan in the last election, where they were saying that the age of political correctness needs to be ended. And "Down with PC," I believe, was the slogan that you could see on the signs.
Yeah.
Even in Rockhampton, it was very surprising to see, because you don't see handmade signs anymore.
No.
You don't see people out with them.
No.
And yet you saw the Liberal Democrat supporters in Rockhampton, which is, for all my love of this town, we are not the most politically active town on the planet.
That's a good way of putting it.
We are quite, as a generalisation, there is quite a lot of let someone else do it.
Yeah, fair enough. I'd agree with that. Yep.
So to actually see a bunch of people out there with signs, which, in saying that, I thoroughly support. I am big believer if you believe something and you want change, whether I agree with you change or not, it's different matter. But if you believe something, get out on the street, get your mates, get the other people who believe with you, get out on the street, do your signs, make your voice heard, and then do it again next weekend, and then do it again the weekend after that. I'm a big believer in protest. As I've said before, I'm a big believer in protest. I'm a big believer in making your voice heard. But this was a very populist approach.
Mm-hmm.
And how can you have such a disparity between coming up with a populist approach like that and then putting out completely ridiculous statements that actually disparage the exact people that you were trying to appeal to just 6 months previously?
Yeah, I don't know.
Taking a moment to think about that.
I don't know. That's the truthful answer. I don't know. I don't know where he's coming from. I can't understand the politics of it, but he doesn't strike me as a guy, or it doesn't strike me as a party that thinks about the politics of it. It strikes me as a party that has its core set of beliefs, and this is what we're going with. And
well, perhaps one thing that can be taken away from this is an opportunity for the other politicians out there to perhaps look at the way things are trending at the moment, not just in Australia but worldwide. And perhaps this is an opportunity to figure out early what the right things to say. If in particular you've got an upcoming election this year, such as we do in Queensland.
Mm.
But this is an opportunity for people to learn a lesson, for politicians to learn, and anybody who's a fan of politics, or anybody who wants to learn more about the workings of politics, of when is the right time to say things, and how do you put the things you want to say. Because absolutely, there should be discussion about the cost of childcare in this country, because there is a problem there.
Yeah.
But thought needs to be put into why. And certainly the last people that should be being attacked on this are the childcare workers, because they are doing a hell of a job. I have the utmost respect for educators at all levels.
Yep.
I have the utmost respect for people who follow that vocation.
Yeah,
because it's certainly not fun that you do for the money.
No, well, that's true.
Of all the vocations that you can do, they choose one. They are drawn to one that makes our society better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, I think that's time to wrap it up at this point. Thank you once again for joining me, Sean.
Pleasure, mate. As always, absolute pleasure.
Thank you to everybody who's stuck with us, who's listened, who's liked us, who has given us a review on iTunes. We thank you very much, because that's the sort of thing that really helps us grow this podcast. And we certainly have plans, not only for this podcast, but I don't want to say too much, but we certainly do have some plans for the rest of this year coming up. I am absolutely looking forward to being able to share them with everybody once we are in a position to do that. Yeah, and
absolutely.
Please, as always, you can hit us up on Facebook at the AustrAliens Podcast on the Facebook page.
Yeah, or you can join us on Twitter. We're at AustrAliens Pod. That's AustralienSpod. And join our conversation there.
Absolutely, and we would thoroughly love it if you did.
And feel free to give us suggestions about what you'd like to talk about. If something in the news has piqued your interest, we're interested too, and we'd like to talk about it.
Absolutely. So, again, thank you to everybody who has listened, everybody who has given us reviews on iTunes, who's just downloaded it, who has told a friend, who's liked us on Facebook or Twitter. Thank you very much, once again, from myself, TJ Hollis, and from Mr. Sean Mills, the voice of the people, signing off. We